Ready. Thank you again, everyone who has joined us this evening. My name is Steve Stewart. I am the person responsible for importing the green beans for the Campesino Committee of the Highlands produces in Guatemala into Canada on behalf of Cafe Justicia BC and BC Casa. BC Casa is a volunteer organization that for some 30 years now has worked in solidarity with social movements in Guatemala and particularly with the Campesino Committee of the Highlands. I'll share in a bit for those that didn't get it while they're in the waiting room, links to our website and Facebook page where you can find out more about this BC Casa and Cafe Justicia. We often facilitate events that enable people to sort of learn more and get in contact with the Campesino Committee of the Highlands, the amazing movement in Guatemala that combines sort of economic production with the struggle for redistributive justice in the country. But most of the time we do that, it's bringing in a representative of the Campesino Committee of the Highlands, the CCDA, and you have to listen to one of us doing the interpretation. We are lucky that recently, through an organization that I like to call our sister organization in the Maritimes, Breaking the Silence Network, has a program that sends cooperants to work with various groups in Guatemala. And most recently, they have sent Raphael Freston to work with the CCDA. He began in January this year and will be there until sometime in June. Raphael is originally from Brazil, but more recently had made his way to Vancouver and was living and working in Vancouver prior to going to work with the CCDA. And so in collaboration with Breaking the Silence, we helped Raphael with his orientation and of course fundraising, selling Cafe Justicia because it sells like hotcakes because the coffee's so good. And Raphael very kindly offered to provide us with some updates, seeing as he's right there in the fields with the CCDA, watching them carry out their harvest and accompanying them in their various activities to protect their communities from the forced evictions and other threats that are taking place to their movement in Guatemala. And so what I thought was initially, first I want to welcome Raphael. Raphael, do you want to say hi to people?
Yes. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with such illustrious people. And thank you for joining as well. This is a great opportunity to get to meet everyone. And hopefully I can share a little bit of my story that hasn't ended yet. So my story here in Guatemala.
So Raphael's speaking to us from the headquarters of the Campesino Committee of the Highlands in the village of Santa Cruz, Quixaya, where he transferred because he lives in the town of San Lucas Toliman because we thought the internet would be better there. But unfortunately it wasn't, and that was why we had a bit of delay, and Raphael's using the data from his phone to connect up with us. So we're going to open this with, I'm going to ask Raphael a few questions about what led him into this work, and then he's going to share with us some images and commentary about what he's been doing down there. So Raphael, how did you learn about the opportunity with Breaking the Silence and the CCDA?
Yeah, it's always hard to comment on how we ended up in places, because I think luck has such a big role in many things that we do. And it was a bit fortuitous that I ran across Breaking the Silence through basically a university connection. It was posted on these social medias, and I was immediately intrigued because there was something about solidarity movements. I didn't quite know about this solidarity movement specifically, but there was something about thinking about solidarity movements globally that I was very interested in. And this is this just came after I finished a master's in peace and conflict studies. And it really, I think, meshed in really well with my other educational background, which was in anthropology. So putting sort of peace and conflict studies and anthropology together, I felt this was an amazing opportunity. And I've always had this interest, I would say, in sort of resistance movements. I think learning about people that push back, or people that somehow oddly don't fit in and are not sort of conforming to a certain expectation of that is, whatever is sort of the norm that is given. And so there was something about sort of subversive movements that I wanted to also sort of learn about and hear their story. And I think that's the importance of solidarity movement, is about sort of hearing the voice of the voiceless, right? And trying to sort of gain the knowledge of can we hear their suffering, their pain, but also what they're calling for. And I think that was a fundamental sort of step that I wanted to take, is sort of explore these avenues. And one thing that I sort of really struck me with BTS is just the amazing sort of, I think the requirement for a certain act of listening, I say, of that is important, that we often sort of disregard today, but it's fundamental, I think, for any sort of reconciliation process. And I think BTS is sort of in that mold. It's in the wheel of thinking these things. And there's something about how we listen to the stories of others, and sort of how do we value them fundamentally. The stories that they tell about this pain and suffering. How do we bring those their stories into dialogue with our stories, right? How can we think of sort of mutual ways of listening and thinking of ways in which we can hear with authenticity? And I think thirdly, just a creative space to reimagine the world. Sorry. Embracing the sort of the ethics of difference, the ethics of solidarity, and the ethics of sort of thinking of pushing back, of empowering from below, I think was something that kind of really struck me with BTS. And I was really fortunate to, by happenstance, run across it. And it's been great since then. So that is my
Raphael,
short...
you mentioned earlier on that you were interested in the aspect of the CCDA and sort of resistance movements. And I think
Yes.
many of us are most familiar with the CCDA for the coffee they produce, the coffee that it's clearly fair trade, but maybe not everyone can see the connection between that and a resistance movement. So maybe you could elaborate a bit on how the coffee feeds into the CCDA's movement, and what are the other aspects of the CCDA's work?
Okay, well, I think important is how to start here. The Cafe Justicia is basically an arm, a branch of CCDA. It's the commercial arm, they would say, of CCDA. It's traditionally it's sort of separated because one is a cooperativa. CCDA is dealing specifically with land issues involving campesinos and indigenous communities, while Cafe Justicia is basically a cooperative organization that is offering fair trade plus, which is the difference. It goes beyond the sort of the regular fair trade ideals, in which there is offering better opportunities for small agricultures here in specifically in this area that I'm in, which is surrounding sort of San Lucas and it's mostly constant. I don't know if there was a map I would show a little bit more, but there's the coffee is concentrated around this area, So we're not talking something that is national, which is what CCDA is. And what it is that it's helping the community, the small agricultures here, but it also aids with the commercial side of CCDA in sort of helping its the sort of the research and the work it has to do in the sort of land the land struggles that it involves across the country. Fundamentally, it's also important to note that coffee harvesting globally, the market is a low wage market. That's sort of on a global scale. What the CCDA does is that it's it cuts the sort of the middleman in which people can sell directly to the cooperative, and therefore it makes they're able to sort of absorb more of the wealth of their production, and that is sort of a fundamental aspect of what they do. They also sort of provide a lot of support for the production, so organic fertilization, which is fundamental to what is going on here, and knowledge about coffee harvesting in general. So there's a strong community that sort of molds around the coffee production here locally. And it's very important, sort of, I think, for the consciousness of land struggles in general here.
And one of the things that you're doing for us, which is we're really looking forward to seeing the results and you'll be sharing in a bit. Some of it is documenting some of the coffee harvest, talking to some of the farmers about their work. But you are also doing some work with the CCDA around the issue of the land struggle. So perhaps you could tell us a little bit about what you've been doing there and what you've learned about the CCDA's fight to sort of document traditional ownership of land.
Yeah. So my work here has been sort of twofold. One of them has been documenting the coffee harvesting process, which, and there's a lot of imagery that I could show about that. The second thing has been following up, visiting communities who are under duress of sort of land eviction, being threatened to violent means usually, but also sort of through the judicial courts to be evicted. And it happens a lot here in Guatemala. Land insecurity has been a sort of a major factor. I mean, land conflict remains even after the land accords, the peace accords in Guatemala. And I've been following a few communities right now that CCDA is sort of giving support. If I could give it in sort of very simple terms, I mean, and this has to do with more sort of participatory research and anthropological work that I'm doing here. But we're working with historical memories, basically, that these communities hold as a way to support them judicially for their land claims. So asking them basically sort of, you know, how long have they been there, how they see land, what have they done with the land, and sort of what is the community life that they have there. And we find that often, even though sort of the judicial courts in Guatemala have been co-opted by oligarchic interests, and usually the decisions are in favor of the sort of the big agro businesses and mining companies. What we once we exhaust the sort of the national courts, we take them to the inter-American human right courts, where usually we can get sort of more favorable decisions. And what happens is that we get protective claims from the international courts that sort of as a signatory, the Guatemalan state should comply. Another part of our work is actually to just make sure that they are complying with these international being watchdogs for that. So yeah, that has been sort of another side of the work that we're doing. There's been a lot of, from the sort of things I've seen, learning a little bit of the, I mean, it's hard when you see it on the ground. It's almost in disbelief when I see some of the things that go on, because communities are being evicted through this sort of judicial maneuvering that some sort of big landholders have. Often, you would find there's no way that judicially it could go through, because it's an outright lie, what we see on the documentations. But it brings a lot of insecurity. A lot of communities that have been, they have 10, 20 years in the same place, and they're put under threat. Often they've made barren land become sort of quite productive, and therefore the interest of the large landholders come in. There's been a huge movement. I mean, palm oil is a huge industry now in Guatemala. Coffee, corporate coffee, also a huge industry. Banana remains a huge industry since, I don't know, goodness knows, but it's a long time. And it also has a sort of huge interest in the land. Those are just a few of the sort of sugarcane as well. There's a lot that you see around. So all this stuff is sort of a big business exploration sort of setup, and they're constantly sort of taking away land. There's big landholders are interested in sort of getting more and more land for their own interest and valuing for their own money. The concentration of land in Guatemala is actually astonishing. Can't actually bring you the number right now, but 2% is sort of held by 80% of the land in Guatemala or something. So it's the concentration is really high, and it's the major source of conflict, and I would say cultural genocide in a way that's happening in Guatemala.
And are there any communities in particular that you've visited that you would want to sort of draw attention to right now?
Yeah. So I went to a community that was in the Atlantic side of Guatemala, in a department called Izabal, close to a city called Livingston. And this community, who by the registrations that we hold, the legal registrations that we hold, we see that there was settlement there in the land there since 1913, somewhere around there. I mean, that's the oldest sort of documentation that we have. But there has been sort of a series of, especially during after the Civil War in Guatemala, there was expulsion going on, evictions that happened, but some people returned it in the 90s. I mean, the people were evicted, in the early 90s, and then they returned recently in 2017. And there's been this huge sort of challenge. It's called the Machu Creek community. And one of the challenges has been to sort of work with the historical memory, to sort of, because their claim is that it's their ancestral land. So how can we sort of see the connection between what being historically there, and also what I've come to realize, and one thing that always lurks on my mind is sort of, why do people want to be there? Why are these? And I've come to realize that in a way, it has to do with sort of a form of living challenge, like it's a survival mechanism. They can work on their land as a subsistence farming is a sort of the predominant form in which they don't have to depend on renting. So if they weren't there, they would have to rent somewhere, which would invoke a sort of many other ways of sort of commodifying life. So I think there's a sort of a huge challenge of just people who are resisting against the sort of the expectations of market norms, and it's sort of an important resistance I find that is happening there. So that is one of the challenges. The other community called Nueva Jerusalén, it's in Escuintla, which is not very far from where I am. It's south, warmer climate. It's basically sugarcane country, large industry, and there's a community there who's basically they've been challenged basically through like evictions throughout the years by sort of land insecurity. So basically, the huge issue for them has been with the pandemic, because they rely on the informal economy, and once the pandemic sort of closed everything down, they were no longer able to sort of pay rent, and that has been a struggle to sort of like we're sort of in the process of having a land getting sort of regularized their land claim, so they don't depend on these sort of pressures from the economy right now. So those have been sort of, yeah.
That gives us a bit of an idea of how the CCDA, they do so many things. Sometimes it's hard to get a grasp on the whole package, and we focus so much on the coffee that sometimes we don't see what's happening elsewhere, and how communities approach the CCDA for that kind of support. But I expect people are very eager to have a look at some of the stuff pictures and stuff you've taken from the harvest and from the coffee processing. So I think I'll move you to that, and then we'll open it for questions from people. They may want to follow up more on the Macho Creek and Nuevo Jerusalem, or may want more questions, have more questions around the coffee. So take it away, Raphael.
Yeah, sorry. This is just a continuation of a little bit about what I was saying. Sorry, I don't know how, is it being shared on the full screen? So, can everyone see the sort of presentation right now, or?
Yep, it's coming through.
Okay. So basically, I'm just trying to sort of give a line that where I am right now is San Lucas Toliman, which is on Lake Atitlan. A marvelous lake. It's usually a tourist region. People want to come here for, I don't know, it's a bit like the Cancun of Guatemala, if I could sort of say it in a way. And often many of the cities around Lake Atitlan sort of attract a lot of Americans, Canadians, and people from all over the world, global north. Usually in a sort of, there's a hippie attraction to the space as well, kind of connecting in a way people try to connect with Maya spirituality here. So there's been a lot of influx of sort of tourism in this region. The curious thing about Guatemala is that despite its sort of violence, this history has been marked with violence. It's also been marked with a lot of tourism, and it's hard to square that. And part of it has to do with geography. That Guatemala is so diverse because it's mountainous, and you can sort of, you're constantly going through sort of microclimates, I would say, in which you can be in one region, and then in 20 minutes you're in a very different sort of climate. You can be in spring and then change change to summer pretty quickly. And I think that sort of kind of shows just how many worlds there are here in Guatemala as well. Because in terms of harvesting, where I am right now in San Lucas, because it's a colder, milder temperature, it's better for vegetables. But if you just follow down the road here to Patulu, which is a straight down, it's warmer climate, and it's better for fruits. So Guatemala is very diverse by its sort of very geographical nature. And San Lucas Toliman is on the southeast corner of Lake Atitlan. And it's the less touristy spot of the lake, I would say, but it doesn't mean it's less beautiful. It's sort of it's a great area. It's got less than 20,000 people, so it's a very small town. But between it, there's a huge volcano. If you see how Lake Atitlan is shaped, there's a huge pier in the south, a huge sort of bay towards the south. That's where Santiago is, and it's the largest, a larger city. So between San Lucas and Santiago there are two major volcanoes that is sort of defining the view of Lake Atitlan. So a lot of the coffee harvesting that we do is between these two cities, I would say. So on the path from San Lucas to Santiago, or where on the map here it says Cerro de Oro, that's where the coffee processing is that CCDA has, and a lot of the coffee coffee plots are there too. So that's the map, sort of kind of showing the satellite sort of topographic nature of the region, with the volcano Atitlan and Toliman. And on the right is just a view from San Lucas Toliman on the bay view, basically, which is not bad. And I just wanted to show you a few mural representations of the art here, which is like sort of amazing in many ways. So quite often in the murals, you would find you find representations of elderly women. What sort of in Mayan worldview, they often refer to the abuelas, grandmothers, but ancestral knowledge in a way. There's a huge sort of role of ancestry, and they commonly refer to the abuela. So there's a lot of representation of sort of women. This is the clothes she's wearing is typical from San Lucas Toliman. So that's the sort of each city has their own kind of garment identity, and also the area is known for its hummingbirds. So there's sort of hummingbirds in this sort of view as well. And there is a sort of I like this imagery because it's a bit, I don't know, it's invoking something about the past and about relationship with nature, and sort of the volcanoes portrayed in the back, and sort of that Lake Atitlan. I don't quite know where this sort of garment, it was taken in San Lucas, but I don't know if this garment is specifically to some space, some area around you. But anyways, another representation of sort of an abuela that you find across the city here. So the coffee harvesting, when I first arrived, and I just wanted to jump into things, if to put it simply, I wanted to kind of just know how coffee is produced and sort of see the process from beginning to end. So this is sort of some of the pictures that I got from that process. I went coffee picking a couple of days, found it tougher than I expected, coffee is this sort of awkwardly unexpectedly, I didn't actually know this. It's this obviously a red cherry that is hard inside. And it's not the easiest cherry to pick out of the tree. It's usually quite hard. Your hands get rough and dirty very quickly. And there's a sort of people spend a whole day just trying to fill up a whole 100-pound bags for that. I wasn't even able to fill half of it when I was trying. So it's not easy. You have to be careful for bugs that might sort of get your finger. And luckily, good coffee is harvested in sort of semi-shade. You want coffee to be in a sort of a semi-shade region. So that obviously helps a little bit, but it can a lot of the fruit can be sort of on top and on the bottom. So you're going around in places. One of the major things this year is that the coffee harvest has been late. It's now over, but it started late due to climate change. And that was sort of the delay to that to coffee production was a big issue and a worrying one for many of the producers. So let me just, this is, some of the pictures.
So Raphael, am I correct that it didn't start till sometime in mid-January this year?
After.
Even later, okay.
Later than that, yes. It was late February, I think, was when.
Compared to a number of years ago when it used to start towards the end of November.
Yes. So there's been a huge thing, change with that. Usually the coffee harvest, they go around 3 times on the same plot. So you would go early in the harvest season, one in the middle and one in the end, because you don't want to pick out the green ones. So there's sort of different speeds that each sort of tree plant has. So this is how they do. They have what they call the canasta in front of them, and you sort of fill it up in that way. So it's back-breaking stuff. And this is just some of the pictures I have. I mean, there's a lot more, but some of the pictures of just the coffee processing. So basically, what they bring the coffee to the what they call the beneficio, which is basically the plants, the productive site, and they weigh the amount here. Basically the cooperativa gives they pay 30 quetzales, sort of a 30 quetzales premium on top of the sort of regular rate that that coffee is made. So so with the intermediaries right now, it's something like 220 quetzales a bag that they're able to sell. The cooperativa,
and there's roughly 5
buys it
quetzales to a Canadian dollar, correct?
5.5 or something. Yes, between that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just to help people put it.
Yeah, no worries. And basically, so they're able to sell it for to buy it for 250 quetzales on the bag. So anyways, this is just some of the pictures of the coffee when the coffee bean when it's coming at its sort of purest, and it's going to go through the whole process. There's like the way that the coffee that is exported it's called lavado. There must be a translation for that, but it's the washed coffee in the end. And basically the fundamental steps is that they have to take the shell, from the coffee, but there's still what they call a honey surrounding the coffee bean, which is actually a delicious taste. By the way, if you ever get a chance to get a chance to taste it. But after that, you have to dry it out, and it becomes a sort of what they call a pergamino there's a dry shell goes over and after that dry, you have to sort of take that dry shell out, and then you get the full sort of coffee bean that we know. And that's what they call the gold coffee. I think it's English, it's called the green coffee form, if I'm not mistaken. But that's the sort of what you see in the middle picture there. I think it's already, that's still in the drying phase. But this is the sort of, yeah, this is a part of the sort of large amounts of water is being done. There's a huge sort of complex sorting system happens. The Cooperativa, which they own this place since 2004, and it's luckily they have 2 machines that is able to, they call it despopuladoras. They're able to sort of take the shell out at a certain speed, take the shell out of the coffee beans. And there's a sorting out system between the good coffee and the bad coffee in every level that happens. So this is on the picture on the right, this is Julissa, who is actually the manager of the plant, of the coffee plant. Cafe Justicia, the CCDA has a huge project with hiring young youth. And Julissa, I think is 25, 24. She's very young. Her background is in agronomy, and she's very much involved with the CCDA. And she has been she basically is the boss in the plant there. And she deals with all the workers, and very competent person. This other picture is one that was done by an event in which they sort of inaugurated a new roaster in the CCDA plant. So basically they gotten the support from the USDA counterpart project, basically. So, you know, this was recently done, that this new roaster is sort of hopeful that it's sort of they're able to make their production quicker. It's important to sort of note that the exported coffee is unroasted. It's the green form. The roasting is simply for sort of local consumption. So you know, they're also looking forward to expand their market here in Guatemala. Yeah, this is another just a picture of some of the communities. This is a community that was visiting here from the one from Nueva Jerusalem. On the left, you see basically their anthropological sort of study that they did. So to sort of how they hired someone to basically get a firm ground on just their history and what is where the conflict is, and sort of how their claim sort of systematize their claim in a way. So that is sort of the end product there. And on the right is basically a picture of them when they came to visit the CCDA headquarters in Quixaya, which is 20 minutes from San Lucas. And they're basically talking there with Leocadio, who is sort of one of the major figures of CCDA leaders. And yeah, it was a sort of an interesting visit in which they came to sort of, they're right now, they're in the process of basically trying to get an amparo, which I'm not sure what the translation would be, but
injunction, I believe is
an injunction, yes, possibly, yeah, an injunction with the International Courts of Human Rights, Inter-American Courts of Human Rights. So there's a huge fight going on right now, and so that they've been visiting here. They're actually coming tomorrow as well here for a visit. So, and yeah, those are just a few of the pictures I have. I didn't want to sort of swarm everyone with all the pictures, but there has been a sort of a mix of some of the coffee and some of the sort of the community work. Yeah, I was wondering if anyone has sort of like questions that we can sort of explore. I know there's different many interests in with our participants. So
Raphael, perhaps you can close the window now and then we can see if people have their hands
oh
raised. And
yes,
I know
Sorry.
that there are, I see that there's a few roasters who use Cafe Justicia that are joining us tonight. And I just want to assure you that, or let you know that this work that Raphael is doing of taking photos and really short video clips of interviews with producers is material that we're going to subtitle and then share with the roasters that do use Cafe Justicia, so you can use it for your own material to share with your customers. But it'll take us a little while to process it all.
yeah, no, just to add to that, like I've taken a lot of, there's a lot more pictures. It's just hard to sort everything out, but there's a lot of pictures and a lot of videos that we took of trying to get all the processes that's going on with the production, basically. And I think just to get a grasp of the importance of the cooperative for workers' rights has been sort of a major part of the work as well. Like coffee production, like I said, has been always sort of low-wage work, and has relied usually on migrant work. The history of Guatemala, I mean, coffee came in sort of late 19th century, and a lot of the sort of social control done by the oligarchy and sort of getting the indigenous people to work on these fields, because one of the things that coffee, it requires a ready sort of mobilized workforce for the harvest. So it's been a huge issue for sort of workers' rights in coffee production, and it's good to see how they push back into sort of organizing a way in which it's actually for the benefit of the workers rather than the big corporations.
Thank you, Raphael. So if anyone has a question, either raise your virtual or your physical hand and we'll call on you. Or an observation, go ahead, Lenora.
Hello, everybody, and hello, Raphael. I was in Guatemala in 2019, 2020, on a different coffee plantation closer to the Atlantic coast, or to El Salvador, actually. And I guess my question is concerning two things. One, I'm in Edmonton, and I don't know where I can get Cafe Justicia, even though I've been on your website. So that's number one. And number two, the land issue, I think, is incredibly important as far as the farmers and their families are concerned. Is that continuing to be a major concern for the CCDA?
So I think Raphael can answer the second part, and we have Tyrion Misko, who's our roasted coffee coordinator, with us tonight as well. So after Raphael answers the second part, Tyrion can answer your first question.
So if I can just sort of repeat, is the land issues sort of still integral for CCDA? Is that the question?
Not only integral, but dangerous, critical for families and their whole life situation. Yes,
that's the short answer. Yes, fundamentally so. There is, if I'm getting this number right, 1,024 CCDA members right now with what they call the orden de captura, basically order to be captured. So prison orders, arrest warrants. Yes. So criminalization of rural life has been huge. And what usually happens, and this is another strategy that is, we see a pattern with, is that with the sort of legal insecurity that goes on, they're able to sort of create situations which get people to sort of react to the sort of to that, and then you get arrest warrants going on, and then in the end, even though if the land doesn't get claimed by the large landholder, the criminalization still holds. So people are still being affected by it, and that isn't being overturned. So one of the major things that they're trying to work on is sort of changing strategies. It's fundamental right now that they get a member elected to Congress, a CCDA member elected to Congress, because that gives extra protection that they can use, some sort of prerogative rights that goes with that they can sort of stop a lot of this criminalization from happening. That has been a sort of a major concern with them. CCDA is criminalization has been a way to intimidate, right? Basically, and having a lot of these communities, they become sort of demoralized from even defending their land. And with the high numbers that are going on, especially because there's a lot of paramilitary movement going on, a lot of private securities, a lot of some of the photos that are sent here to CCDA, they're quite terrifying. They're sort of virtual armies that go into sort of to intimidate communities. So we're talking about blunt force many times, even though it's almost in disbelief. It's hard to believe that such weapons can be used in that way. But so yes, this is a short answer, and that has been a reality in all the cases I've looked at. There's been a use of violence, brute violence, to incriminate, that would get a reaction, and therefore they will be incriminated from that.
And Tyrion, do you want to provide a bit of advice for Lenora about where it might be possible to get hold of Cafe Justicia in or near Edmonton?
Hi, Lenora. Yeah, we are very difficult to buy coffee from, I have to say. We are so small. Most of our coffee is, we sell by mail. And we are very fortunate that over the years we've developed some relationships with people who buy on behalf of their friends and quite often church communities, and people. So they send us like monthly orders, and that's how. So they sort of bulk buy like a co-op. Unfortunately, we don't have anybody in Edmonton, but if you get in touch with me, and maybe if you could send me your email in chat, I'll get in touch with you, and we can see about mailing you some coffee. We're very happy to do that.
Okay, thanks. I will do that. Thank you.
And Tyrion, maybe you could put the roasted coffee email address in chat in case there's others that might want to become distributors in their area. Any other questions for Raphael? One sort of follow-up to Lenora's question about the situation in the countryside. Recently, we had a kind of meeting, a virtual meeting with some of the representatives of the CCDA, and they were in the CCDA's office in Alta Verapaz, which looked like a campsite because a community about 6 months ago in Alta Verapaz, their homes were burned by these paramilitary private armies of the agro industry that Raphael had mentioned, and they had nowhere to live. And so the CCDA not only was hosting them all in their office, like in the kind of patio of their office, but had used profits from the Cafe Justicia sales to hire a teacher to provide it, teaching, like rudimentary classes to the kids, so they didn't lose that.
The Alta Verapaz region is actually I think the region that has the most communities in conflict, and which is basically a lot of the agribusiness interest is there.
Raphael, do you ever feel unsafe?
Like, yes, but it's like with the standards of sort of safe living in Canada, yes, I feel unsafe. Is it because of, I think sort of just the general living in Guatemala there's been an escalation of violence, a sort of a normalization of it, which is huge in just the day-to-day aspect. Luckily, where I am is actually relatively safe. San Lucas Toliman is I think it's fairly safe. I mean, if you go to Guatemala City, I definitely notice a huge difference in sort of just taking precautions. I haven't sort of felt unsafe necessarily directly related to my work here. It's more related to just, you know, the traveling conditions, the roads, and also just the high level of petty theft. But I think it's important to sort of to grapple with just how big violence is here in terms of and the effects it has on people's imagination. I mean, the election for Guatemala is coming up in end of June, if I'm not mistaken. And violence is a huge issue that is going on here. And the thing about violence, it generates a sort of a reactionary subjectivity, I would say. Like, so you know, people really want to fight off what they call delinquents, right? Delinquents, and delinquents is almost as if they're non-human. And there's a huge sort of specter in Guatemalan politics right now has been Bukele, the president of El Salvador, who has just sort of inaugurated this huge prison of 40,000 or so capacities, like the largest prison in the world. And I mean, a lot of human rights lawyers and activists have condemned it because it's very poor conditions, and they basically gathered up people through extrajudicial means. But a lot of people sympathize with that approach because violence has gotten out of hand. So it's a huge issue, just in general, in Guatemala.
Thank you.
Can I ask
Raphael-
Raphael, you know, a lot of what we hear in Mexico, a lot of the violence is connected with cartels like drug or avocado situations. Is that kind of paramilitary activity connected to corporate stuff like cartels, like we've heard about mining and that kind of stuff? Where are these paramilitaries, like who's paying them? Who's buying their bullets?
It's a good question. Not one that I'm fully know the knowledge about. So drug cartels definitely have wield a large influence in the political parties here in Guatemala. I think the major political parties who are favored to win the election definitely have a foot into the drug trade, and it's been an issue even for the oligarchy, I think, who are sort of like losing control of it, and it can become a sort of a drug state. Who pays for the paramilitary groups? Yeah, I don't quite know. I haven't really sort of followed that process. I mean, I'll be interested. That's a good question to sort of have in the back of the mind. Security industry in Guatemala is huge. You walk anywhere and you see private security with large guns and everything. They're usually not paid that much, but there is a lot of money in it, and obviously sort of agribusiness would have a lot of money to sort of interest in investing in that. So I don't quite know if it's sort of drug related or if it's just corporations doing their a lot of their work.
Raphael, you mentioned earlier that the CCDA sees it as really important having a spokesperson or an advocate within the Congress because of the way they can shine a more official light on some of the abuses happening in the communities. And I saw last week that the congressperson that's been the closest ally of the CCDA, Aldo Davila, has now been disqualified from running by the Supreme Electoral Tribunal. Can you sort of give a bit of information on that? Have you followed that at all, or have you heard from the members of the CCDA about how they feel about, like, it seems this time around, any sort of progressive people that have a real chance of winning are getting disqualified, which is a new thing in a way. I don't know if you've heard any commentary from the CCDA people you're working with on this.
Not much, but actually the relationship with Davila seems to be a bit ambiguous, as far as I can tell. So like they're close, they don't like everything, but some things it's basically the one that gives gives a voice to them in a way. But they really would like to elect one of their own. So it seems a bit the law here is, fast and loose, from what I understand, and they were worried about Thelma Cabrera building momentum, and they decided to bar her early on this time. And important, Thelma Cabrera is an indigenous woman, the major sort of indigenous figure in Guatemala. It's interesting to know people's reactions to her here. I often find that there's some people are suspicious about her, thinking that she's sort of being manipulated from other people. So there's still a lot of prejudice, I think, against indigenous women, even sort of commonplace prejudice from even other indigenous people here. That has been one of the things I've observed. If
I wish I had it at hand, but if you go to the Democracy Now! Website, you can find an interview with Thelma Cabrera that's translated in English. It's actually from the last elections, but it sheds some light, and it also, just from reading the interview, you can see that she's not someone who would be easily manipulated. Yes. So I think we can take one last question and then we'll wrap up the activity, if there are any other questions or comments.
Oops. I want to ask about coffee. I know we've gone on to politics, but I'm super interested about coffee. And just thinking about what's happening in like the harvest getting later and later, and just thinking about what's happening here in Canada and the extreme weather. What is there talk there about what it means for the coffee harvest and what it means for, we've I think the other thing that I've been thinking about is coffee rust and how climate change is impacting coffee rust, and have they been seeing a problem with coffee rust in the high altitudes in Guatemala?
I haven't heard of coffee rust before. Is that sort of okay?
La Roya.
Well, I haven't. Sorry, go ahead.
There was a big outbreak about 4 or 5 years ago, but I think they managed to develop strains that are more resistant. But go ahead if you have information.
Right. No, I don't actually.
It's the same one I have.
It is. It is worrying because obviously climate change is changing not only sort of the harvest season in general, but it's affecting the amount of coffee that they're able to produce. Also, just the quality, I think gets compromised, and there's worrying about just what it might be, just the insecurity for what it comes for the following season, and how it's, you know, how do you invest in the business in the end when you're always sort of unsure about what the next season will hold. So I think there is a huge concern around that, but it's also it's almost, I don't know if there's a sort of a discussion around it necessarily. Just a major thing in general that CCDA does is that they try to sort of work with organic fertilizers, so they visit communities, small landholders, and try and give them the knowledge about what you can do with sort of organic fertilizing, and how you can make your own process, and stay away from the sort of the buyers and the main fertilizers, which are expensive and also in the long run are harmful for the land. So there's a lot of work in terms of keeping this sort of organic production going, which is always, I think, has been a temptation for many smallholders to take these shortcuts and buy fertilizers. A community I visited here called San Antonio, which is just up the mountain, their major concern is lack of water. Is a lot of dry season is happening, and one of the things that CCDA has been doing is sort of trying to, they're using these they're growing tomatoes with sort of this nylon knowledge, like I don't know, it's like a greenhouse sort of thing. So they help communities with that, of like sharing that sort of ability to do that. But water inevitably is necessary. And one thing I noticed there in San Antonio, you see large avocado farms. And avocado, obviously, they take a lot of water. So I think there's the effect of monoculture as well is a huge conflict for them, because monoculture in the end is devastating for even the sort of the land quality and for the water levels, which is being affected obviously by climate change. I haven't specifically sort of explored beyond that. From what I've seen, it's sort of very observational level, my role right now. But yeah, I don't know what the other end of your question of sort of if there's some action or something, but I think it's been a topic that they're probably even bringing up in the CCDA, within the CCDA, but it's about sharing knowledge in the end about how to produce and maintain production that empowers the Campesino movement, about how to fight climate change. Fundamentally is sort of, I think, their major step.
Thank you, Raphael, and thank you for sharing so much with us. It's nice to sort of get a perspective from someone who's like right there, and seeing also for the first time these things. So it's sort of a similar experience than many of us would like to have.
Yeah.
But
I'll just, sorry,
okay,
if I can just, no, just really briefly, just to add that, I'm just coming towards the end of 2 months with the CCDA, 3 months in Guatemala, but 2 months with them. So a lot of these questions are really great, because they also sort of present, what are the next where could I explore these questions in a way. My time is till the end of August here in Guatemala, so it's I'm really happy for the questions, even though if I can't answer them completely, it's important to know sort of where I can direct and know what to look at. So thank you very much for all the questions.
And thank you. And hopefully when you are back, hopefully you'll at least for a while be back in Vancouver, and we can organize. I know you'll be wanting to visit the Pacific Spirit United Church, which really played a good role in helping you do the fundraising for the event. But we're hoping we can also do a public event with you here and report back. And if there are questions that you are asked that you won't be able to answer, I also want to let people know that provided the visa comes through, we will be hosting a visit from Nady Huracan, the coordinator of the Cafe Justicia program for the CCDA in September. And so hopefully she'll be able to visit a number of towns in Western Canada and sort of talk a little bit more about the process of the coffee.
Yeah, just as a final word, I'd like to say, first of all, that so Cafe Justicia that is sold in BC is actually I think their major exports is to BC. So they're very grateful for the work that BC Casa and others do in Canada. It's their largest market, Cafe Justicia to Canada, and you know, it's I think they're all very grateful for the help that sort of just what they see in Canada and the support they're getting and the interest that many Canadians have on not only just the coffee itself, but just what the struggle really is, right? And what we're doing with a fundamental conflict that is going on in Guatemala. That can fundamentally teach us a lot, even about the conflict we see in Canada as well.
Thank you, Raphael, and thank you everyone who joined us and stayed on to the end. I was unfortunate, I failed in my attempt to live stream. I got a message saying that I do not have permission to live stream, but we have recorded the event. So what we'll do is we'll take the recording and post it on our Facebook or if it won't let us, on our website. So people that weren't able to make it or people that want to go back and check, is that true what Raphael said? Can scroll back on the recording. Just give us a couple of days to get it up. Thanks everybody and good night.
Oh, yeah, thank you very everyone.